Alexander Solzhenitsyn, in his writing called The Gulag Archipelago, tells a story. And in this story, what is happening is there's a district conference party going on, a communist party going on, and the secretary was speaking, and he was the replacement for the one who had just gotten arrested. And so at the end of his speech, he began to tell this one thing. He began to talk about how great Stalin was and how great Stalin is. And everybody stood up and began to clap. And they clapped for 1 minute, they clapped for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. And before too long, some of the older people were starting to get really weak, and they were getting tired and wore out by clapping so much. Everyone was starting to see the silliness of the whole thing, because it just didn't make any sense. But who would dare stop first? Who would be the first to quit? Who would be the first to stop praising Stalin? And there was one. He was the factory foreman at the furniture place. And he sat down and he stopped at 11 minutes, and everyone was relieved. They were glad it was over. But unfortunately, he got arrested and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. They came up with some trumped up charges, but the real reason that he got arrested was because he was the first to stop. And at the end of his final interrogation, he filled out Form 206, the final document of the interrogation. His interrogation gator reminded him this one thing: don't ever be the first to stop applauding. Don't ever be the first to stop applauding. This is an example of when the state becomes God. This is an example of how that can be. This is an example of how we can worship those in leadership. How does the state become God? There's a three-step process that it happens. The first is that there's chaos. Let's go back a century ago. Let's go back to 1922. Germany had just been beaten in World War I. They had financed this war through debt. They didn't tax the people, but rather they put the country in debt, and that debt climbed and climbed and climbed throughout that war. And so what happened was there was a rise in inflation. In the spring of 1922, it took 300 marks, their method of their money, to equal $1 of U.S. Less than a year later, in 1923, it was 50,000 marks for $1. It would cost $1 billion or billion marks to buy a stamp. You would have to take a wheelbarrow full of money to the store in order to buy groceries. The inflation rate was at an incredibly high time. Politicians and government officials were killed by extremist groups that played on racism, nationalism, and economic anxiety. Private armies were established that led to the Nazi Party. So the first thing is that there's chaos going on. The second is a crisis. The crisis didn't come, though, until 1933, whenever the Reichstag building was burnt down. It was lit on February the 27th, exactly 4 weeks prior. Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. It was blamed on communists. However, many believed that it was the Nazis who lit the Reichstag. And what happened was it burned down and caused a crisis. The Reichstag building would be equal to our U.S. Capitol. The third thing that you need, the third step, is control. It led to control. The next day, President Hindenburg signed the Reichstag fire decree suspending most civil rights. The writ of habeas corpus was gone, freedom of expression was gone, freedom of the press was gone, the right to free association was gone, public assembly was gone, and the secrecy of your mail and your telephone calls were gone. That's what happens. The process of a state becoming God. It's whenever rights are taken away. Now the question is, could that happen to us here? Could that happen? Maybe has it happened? Think about it. We've fought 2 wars over the last 20 years. How do we finance those wars? Debt. A lot of debt, right? I mean, a lot of things that we're at about $30 trillion of debt. Each of you owe a little bit more from this last week. Borrow money to pay for college, borrow money to get through COVID. Think about this. Would it be unlikely today that a good chemistry student would not be hired by a university to have a job with them because they won't sign papers, documents on gendered fluidity, plural pronouns, and sign a diversity statement? Is that possible? And when your social media accounts are examined before you get a job, where you stand on social issues to determine whether or not you meet the litmus test, could that possibly happen today? When big tech companies cancel those who have differing views on vaccines, climate change, gender issues, they cancel. My brother-in-law, who's a little bit political, he got canceled by Twitter. And it was interesting that the reason he got canceled was this. The official reason given to him by Twitter was this. The reason you are canceled is because you are trying to avoid being canceled. I mean, seriously, that was the email that he got back. It's a strange time, right? Some ministries and churches have been canceled. Others have succumbed to pressures. In Nazi Germany, many churches had the swastika flag put on them in order to say, hey, we're with you, don't bother us. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote this. He was a dissident of the Soviet Union, if you don't remember. How does freedom die? With thunderous applause. Now, none of this is new. In chapters 1 and 3 of Daniel, we see a couple of things going on there. Is that what happens is that whenever something that is not absolute or is absolute becomes relative, something that becomes of ultimate importance becomes of no importance or limited importance, or something becomes of that which is relatively important to become ultimate importance, or something that is somewhat important becomes ultimate importance. And so we see that in Daniel chapter 1 and 2. And eventually, something relative becomes absolute. Because you know what? Human beings need absolutes, right? You know, we need rules, don't we? We need some things that are absolute. We need those. So what happens is that we make something that is relative absolute. Now, there are 4 main things that have been made into absolutes that are relative. 4 things that have been made somewhat important to ultimate importance. Want to know what they are? The state, power, sex, and wealth. Those are the 4 things. And today what we're going to concentrate on is the power of the state, or and power and state, those 2. From time immemorial, this is what's happened. And when the state becomes ultimate, the state becomes God. And whenever you and I think that the state is going to be the solution to the American problems, there's where we're going to get burned. Because the kingdom of God will never arrive on Air Force One. It will never happen. Because it's always a human being flying on Air Force One, right? It always is, okay? And we've seen where we've taken a couple of recent presidents and made them, whether you're on the left, maybe President Obama, some people on the left, made him out to be a god, a sort of a messianic figure. And if you're on the right, some people have made Trump a god, right? Neither one works because they're not God, right? Okay, so let's walk through this. Now, here's the context. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has his dream, and the dream I talked about last week is Daniel interprets the dream, and he says the head of gold represents the nation of Babylon, but it also represents who? Nebuchadnezzar, right? Because you are the head of gold. Well, Nebuchadnezzar has this, this moment in which he says, sees that that God of the Bible, the God of Daniel, is pretty good. But then his ego gets in his way, and so he has built for himself a 90-foot statue in the plain of Dora, which they have found that plain of Dora. They've dug it up, and they believe they found the pedestal in which it sits at. On this 90-foot statue, we don't know exactly what it was, but we believe it was the appearance of a man. It was a human being, and most likely it was a picture statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And so what his order was this, is that whenever you hear, to gather up all these people, whenever you hear the instruments play, whenever you hear the music get turned on, guess what you're supposed to do? Everyone is to bow down and worship the statue, the idol. Pretty basic, just a basic law. Bow down, worship the idol, worship Nebuchadnezzar, right? Now, there's a couple of things as we get into this. First of all, verse 6 in chapter 3, and whoever does not fall down and worship me immediately will be cast into burning fiery furnace. Wow. Don't bow down. Guess what? You light up my life. Okay? You become fried. Okay? That's what happens. Okay? So that's persecution, right? That's the pressure of persecution. The second thing that we notice is, look at verse 7. It says, therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the bagpipe, I didn't know they were Scottish, and every kind of music, as soon as you hear the music, guess what? You're to bow down. That's what's supposed to happen. Now, it's interesting that Nebuchadnezzar understands music. Music has an ability to sort of like suck you in, right? It's a seductive thing. How many of you have realized you're driving down the road, you hear a song that you like on the radio, and you're singing right along with it, and all of a sudden you realize this is not the kind of song that a good Christian ought to be singing. I remember when I became a Christian, a disciple of Jesus Christ, I was into country western music. There was a song by the Kendalls, a father and daughter group, and they sang this song, heaven's just a sin away, oh, just a sin away. Really? I thought it was through Jesus. But I didn't realize that I knew the song off by heart because it just sort of sucked me in. Or how about Journey song, Can't Stop Believing? You know what that's about? Not prostitution. We just sing right along with it, right? We just go along with it. And Nebuchadnezzar understood that he could get the crowd to fall and bow to him. The pressure of law Nebuchadnezzar uses. You do this or you die. You do this or you fry. That's the simple solution he had. Bow down before the image. And so that gives us the context. And now we enter into chapter 3. So everybody hears the music, but there's three guys. Daniel talks about the story. Three guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do not bow. They do not bend. They do not go down. They refuse to do this. They refuse to bow before Nebuchadnezzar's idol. So let's pick it up on verse 15. Now, if you are ready, now this is Nebuchadnezzar talking to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, giving them another chance to bow down. Hey, I'm not going to fry you yet. But if you don't shape up, you're going to get fried. Here's what he says. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And then look at this question. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hand? Nebuchadnezzar does not believe that there is a God who will deliver. He didn't believe that there was one who would reveal the truth about his dream in chapter 2. What's going on? What's going on? Is there a God who can deliver you? Is there a God who will come? And when the state becomes God, do you believe that there's a God who can deliver? Verse 16 says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." These disciples of God believed that God could deliver them. Nebuchadnezzar thought he had the power, though, didn't he? I've got the power. I mean, that's how he sort of, I am the one in charge. I can do this. But he found out he doesn't have ultimate power. In chapter 2, he learned that his power was limited. His time for power was limited. And now he had to really recognizes, that will have to recognize that the exercise of his power is limited. He can't force somebody to do something, even at the point of death. You can say no. You can. And sometimes you must. If you're a disciple of Jesus, you must say no. And that's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego does here. They say no. We will not bow. We will not bend, even if we are thrown in the fiery furnace. And our God is able to deliver us. But if he doesn't deliver us, that's okay. He's still delivering us from your hand, from your power, because you have no power over us. See, that's what's happening here. Now, let's go on verse 19. Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury. Why? Because he didn't have the power. And the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Remember, he had already in chapter 1 raised them up to higher levels. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it usually is heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. And the men who bound in their cloaks, their tunics, and their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the fiery furnace. Because the king's order was so urgent, the furnace overheated, and the flames of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In other words, these guards who were taking them in, guess what? They're the ones who get burned up. It must have been really odd. They're getting burned up, and they keep walking in. You know, whoop, there goes another one. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. They're bound, right? They're tied up. They've got ropes around them. They aren't going to make it because they're bound up, right? They're bound up. You know what? There are consequences to holding your convictions, right? You hold your convictions, sometimes you're going to experience being thrown into whatever it is. Maybe it is a fiery furnace. Maybe it's losing a job. Maybe it's. There are consequences. See, God doesn't force us to make the choice that he wants us to. But sometimes consequences come, so we have to recognize that. Let's continue on, verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste, and he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But these 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like the son of the gods." They wouldn't bend, they wouldn't bow, they wouldn't burn. They were protected by the 4th man in the fire. Who is that 4th man? I believe it's Jesus Christ. That Jesus Christ came along and walked. And whether or not you and I are thrown into the fiery furnace, or we are shut out by a job, or we're given some kind of persecution in some way, guess what? Our God, our Jesus is with us. He will never leave us or forsake us. He will guide us and be with us no matter what. There was a time when I was persecuted by a family member. It was terrible, and it was hard, and it was difficult. But that family member could not persuade me by her actions and by her words that I was alone. That Jesus was with me. And Jesus will be with you. And when Nebuchadnezzar came, verse 26, when Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the burning fiery furnace, he declared, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. Isn't that great? Verse 27, the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not any power over the bodies of these men. And their hair on their heads was not singed, and their cloaks were not harmed, and no one smelled of fire had been upon them. That's almost impossible. My dad used to drive us around in a 73 Volkswagen Beetle, and he would smoke his Camels. All 7 of us would be shoved into that car, and the windows would be shut except for that little window on the side. You know what I'm talking about, folks that are older? I came out smelling like cigarettes. That's why I'm out of breath today, because of the Camels. I smoked many packs of Camels through my dad. He smoked them first. Question is there a God? What God will deliver you out of my hand? What God will deliver you? There's a God who could and deliver them. It was something in that fire, though, that was burned off. Guess what it was? It wasn't their clothes. It wasn't their tunics. It was the ropes that bound them. The ropes that bound them. The ropes that controlled them were burnt off. Maybe you're going through a tribulation and difficulty right now. Something that is hard. Something that is difficult. And maybe that's the fire of God burning something off that's controlling you so that you will no longer be controlled by it. Just a little side thing. The fire burned off the ropes. Verse 28, and Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, look what he says. Blessed be the God of Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, who sent his angel to deliver his servants who trusted in him, and sent aside the king's command, and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own. Therefore I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against Shadrach, like the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, shall be torn limb from limb. Man, that guy likes violence. Woo! And their houses shall lay in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. He found out there is a God who can deliver. And the king pronounced Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province. Promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. God is a great deliverer. But he doesn't deliver us from the decision we have to make. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego weren't delivered from the decision of whether they were going to bow down or not. They had to make that choice. They had to make that call. They couldn't ignore it. They had to. And God blessed them because of the decision they made. I want to read some other passages just to remind us of our God. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, Isaiah 43. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. You know, being a disciple of Jesus, we face decisions. And we will have to decide whether or not we're going to follow God or follow man, follow God or follow the state. Who are we going to follow whenever God's rules are different than man's rules? Jesus challenges us this way. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. You got to make a decision. We got to decide. Jesus promises, beware of men, for when they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in the synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, in other words, the state, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. And when they deliver you over, do not be anxious about how you will speak or what you are to say. For what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. How does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, even if you throw us into the fiery furnace, we will not bend, we will not bow, we will not. What gives them the strength to do that? What makes them able? Because they were willing? That's a big part of it. See, sometimes God doesn't always deliver the person, does he? We can look back over history. Joan of Arc still fried. Right? Tyndale still burned. He doesn't always deliver us. In the Hebrew chapter 11, it talks about all these great men of faith and women of faith and how God delivered them. But then, towards the end of that part, he says this. Women received back their dead by resurrection. He says some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better day. They died. Our responsibility is to trust him. And to trust him regardless of the outcome, because we don't believe God just because of what he does, but because of who he is. Where will our faith be? So I want to give you a few things. What if the state becomes God? Now I'm going to give you these. I know there's 6, and they're going to go through them really quickly. But I want you to follow along and think about them. First of all, expect persecution. This is what Peter wrote. One who tried to avoid persecution, right? He denied Jesus 3 times. He wanted to avoid persecution. This is what he said. Wrote, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange was happening to you." It's strange if you're not being persecuted, it almost sounds like, right? That's what he's saying there. But rejoice insofar as you share in Christ's sufferings, that you may rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Fear and anger are not options for us as Christians. We need to express ourselves with faith and love. That's how we are to do it. We are to identify ourselves as Christians. Now listen, as your pastor, I'm going through Daniel. The reason I'm going through Daniel is because I have this pressure, holy pressure, I guess it is, from God to prepare you. Okay? I don't want you to lose your faith. I want you to stay strong. I hope we don't go through it. I hope we don't. But I am burdened to prepare you for the possibility. Because things have changed so much over the last 20 years that I can't fathom where it's going to be in the next 20. So I am burdened to prepare you that persecution, likely expect it. Secondly, stand alone. Sometimes you're going to have to, the strongest person is that person who stands alone. You know, there wasn't just 4 Jews that went off to Babylon. You know how many went off to Babylon? Around 10,000. Where were they? Where were they? See, the crowd is going to go. You know, that means that there's about 1/3 person here in this room that will stand alone. I want to make that different. I want it to be 100% that we are able to stand alone. In this culture, the road of obedience is going to be lonelier and lonelier under cultural pressures that mount. Third thing is to fear God. These men feared God more than the state. They feared God more than Nebuchadnezzar, even though Nebuchadnezzar had the ability to kill them. They feared God more. We so emphasize grace that we no longer really fear God. So we feel very free and confident in sinning because of grace, instead of committing ourselves to the fear of God. We need to fear him. Fourthly, we need to refuse to live by lies. Refuse to live by lies. There is a lot of change in definitions, right? What is a woman? I thought the Y chromosome settled that. Pregnant men is a lie. Okay? Let's not buy into that. We don't have to buy into it. Just because the culture is. Just because those around us are telling us lies, we don't have to believe in the lies. Let's be careful about that. We may have to stand alone in refusing to live by the lies. Win in eternity. It's not necessary to win in this life, but rather to win in the life of come. Jesus talks about being us more than conquerors, right? That's what Paul talks about, more than conquerors. Or blessed is he who has overcome, the conqueror, the one who has won for eternity, not necessarily for here and now. And lastly, have a powerful witness. Lastly, have a powerful witness. The witness that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what happens? Nebuchadnezzar begins to bless God. Now, I don't believe that Nebuchadnezzar at this point has quite crossed over to faith in Yahweh, but he will. Bill and I were talking this week, and we both agreed that we think that we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. That ruthless, ungodly, unholy man. Because he came to faith and trust in Jesus. Well, through the Father. But he believed in that one who was like the Son of God in the fiery furnace, right? I mean, at least believe that. I have a feeling we're going to see old Nebi up there. And he's going to say, shouldn't have built that idol, shouldn't have done it. Should not have done it. You never know who might believe because of your witness. You never know. Your witness can be a powerful witness. I had a mother who was into the occult stuff when I became a Christian. See, my rebellion against my mom was to become a Christian. I'll show you. You know, she gave me a Ouija board for my 14th birthday. 15th birthday, I was coming to Christ, so it was okay. All right, by the 17th birthday, I was baptized into Christ. But you know, I prayed for my mom for 30 years. And she came back to Christ. You never know what your witness is going to do. You got a witness. Maybe there's somebody in your home that's not believing. Hey, have a witness. It's a powerful witness. And when you stand with faith and trust and you're able to face difficulties and trials with love and faith and trust in Jesus Christ, not trust in the government, not trust in the next election, not trust in all that stuff, but rather in Jesus, you will have a powerful witness. Because Jesus died on the cross for your sins and mine. He died for us to give us life everlasting. He removed us from the bonds, the control of our sinfulness. For once we were slaved to, and set us free. And that is a powerful witness. And on Sunday mornings, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And that's why we take communion each and every Sunday. So let's